Redditor 1. I never believed in ghost stories until that one unforgettable night in Colorado Springs. A vacation stop that was supposed to be a brief, lighthearted pause on our journey, but instead opened a door to the inexplicable. It was early evening, and the fading light was reluctantly yielding to the encroaching darkness as a fierce storm gathered in the distance. I found myself lingering on the hotel balcony, the cool air carrying a hint of ozone and the promise of something unusual. My family was inside, chatting and laughing over plans for the next day, entirely unaware of the spectacle unfolding above. As I gazed upward, mesmerized by the swirling mass of clouds, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There, among the roiling heavens, a round, silver object moved in a corkscrew pattern, weaving in and out of the thickening clouds as if dancing to a rhythm only it could hear. Its movement was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a graceful yet unsettling spiral that defied all logic. I called out to my family with a mix of excitement and apprehension, urging them to look at the sky. But when they joined me at the window, all they saw was the chaotic ballet of storm clouds and dimming light. The object had vanished, leaving only the echo of its inexplicable path. Determined to capture the moment, I snapped a quick photo with my phone. The image, however, offered little more than a tiny, unconvincing speck against the vast expanse of darkening sky, a pixelated hint of what I had witnessed. Later that night, as we recounted our day with laughter and teasing, I brought up the sighting. My family laughed, dismissing it as a trick of the light or an overactive imagination fueled by vacation fatigue. But deep inside, I knew that what I saw moved in a way no conventional aircraft could, and it stirred something in me that I couldn't quite shake. The storm's approach that night was as sudden as it was fierce. I settled into my hotel room, the steady pitter-patter of rain against the window lulling the space into a deceptive calm. Yet, the ambiance was far from comforting. The sound of the rain was punctuated by a low, persistent hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the room. Every so often, the lights flickered in a way that made shadows dance along the ceiling, as if unseen hands were coaxing them into life. Lying in bed, I could feel the residual chill from the early evening seeping through, mixing with a rising sense of unease that I couldn't ignore. Sleep was elusive that night. Every creak of the old building and every gust of wind felt amplified in the oppressive silence. At one point, I thought I heard a gentle tapping at the door, a sound that might have been the rain, or perhaps something else entirely. My pulse quickened as I strained to listen, but the sound was so soft, so deliberate, that it could have been a whisper rather than a knock. The memory of that silver spiral, its corkscrew dance etched into my mind, mingled with these subtle disturbances, transforming my room into a stage for a performance of dread. Unable to ignore the mounting tension, I wrapped myself in a blanket and crept into the dim hallway. The corridor was shrouded in shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Every step I took echoed ominously, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed by an unseen presence. The air felt heavy, charged with a latent energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I passed by closed doors and listened, half expecting a whisper or a soft murmur from behind them. Instead, the silence was absolute, except for the persistent tapping at my door that had followed me here, a sound that now seemed to mock my every step. Returning to my room, I found that the mysterious tapping had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness that was more unsettling than any noise. I sank onto the bed, my mind racing with questions. Had that silver object been a mere curiosity, or had it been a harbinger, a sign that something otherworldly was now intersecting with our world? I pulled out my phone to review the picture I had taken, but the image was disturbingly unhelpful. A tiny dot, devoid of any clear shape or detail. It was as if the evidence had been deliberately erased, leaving me with nothing but a memory and a gnawing sense of dread. As midnight crept in, the storm's roar outside mingled with a soft, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to seep through the very fabric of the room. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, fueled by the night's unsettling events, but the whisper grew more insistent, as if it were trying to communicate something. I scribbled down every detail in a small notebook by the window. A description of the silver object, the tapping at the door, the persistent hum that filled the space. Each word felt like a desperate attempt to anchor myself to reality, even as my mind raced with unsettling possibilities. Every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by visions of that spiraling silver light, accompanied by shadowy figures that flickered at the edge of perception. In one dream, I found myself back on the balcony, but this time I was not alone. Pale, spectral faces emerged from the darkness, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. I reached out to them, desperate for answers, but as soon as I touched one, it vanished into the stormy night. I awoke gasping, drenched in sweat, the echo of their silent pleas ringing in my ears. Morning arrived with a hesitant light that did little to dispel the lingering terror of the night. I sat in the small breakfast nook of the hotel, watching as my family chattered amiably about mundane plans and silly anecdotes, their laughter a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had enveloped me hours before. I tried to recount the strange events, from the mesmerizing spiral of light to the ghostly whispers in the dark, but my words fell flat. They smiled politely, their amusement tinged with disbelief, and soon the conversation moved on. I was left with my private recollections, a secret tapestry of inexplicable encounters that only grew more real with each retelling. I left that hotel with more than just a souvenir of an odd vacation stop. The experience had changed me, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. Even now, whenever I glance upward at a stormy sky, I remember that silver spiral and the profound unease that followed it. I wonder if it was merely a natural anomaly or something far more sinister, perhaps a beacon for restless spirits or an omen of forces that defy human comprehension. In the quiet moments, when the world seems too still, I can almost hear that soft tapping at the door, feel the chill of an unseen presence lingering just out of sight. The incident in Colorado Springs became a turning point in my understanding of the paranormal. What began as a seemingly benign sighting, a fun little story to share and laugh over, transformed into a harrowing encounter that shattered the boundary between skepticism and belief. I carry that night with me, a constant reminder that the line between the natural and the supernatural is perilously thin, and that sometimes the universe chooses the most unsuspecting moments to reveal its darker secrets. Even as I write these words, a subtle shiver runs down my spine, as if the memory of that storm and its strange visitor is still watching, waiting for the next chance to make its presence known. I don't know if I'll ever find definitive answers to what I experienced that night. All I have are fragments of memory, a fleeting silver light, the eerie tapping, and the ghostly whispers that now haunt the quiet hours of my nights. My family may continue to laugh about it, dismissing it as nothing more than an amusing anomaly on our vacation, but I know better. Some mysteries are not meant to be fully understood, only felt in the depths of one's bones and remembered in moments of solitary reflection. And as long as I live, I will keep my notebook close, a silent chronicle of the inexplicable, waiting for the day when the veil between our world and the next might finally be lifted. Redditor 2. I've never forgotten that day in 6th grade, a day that began as ordinary as any other, but ended with a secret that has haunted me ever since. I had just been released from after-school orchestra practice, the last notes of our final piece still echoing softly in my ears as I made my way to the back parking lot of the school. The air was cool and calm, the fading light of early evening casting long, gentle shadows over the concrete. I waited there for what felt like both a few minutes and an eternity, expecting my mom's familiar car to pull up and escort me home. I remember standing there with nothing but the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement and the distant hum of the day winding down. The parking lot was nearly empty, and I felt a subtle thrill in the solitude. A quiet moment all to myself before the world resumed its usual clamor. The sky was vast and open, painted in soft hues of pink and orange, and I couldn't help but gaze upward occasionally, admiring the way the last light mingled with the coming dusk. Then, out of the stillness, a high-pitched screech tore through the air. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard, a piercing, almost otherworldly cry that sliced through the calm with relentless urgency. I froze, my heart pounding so fiercely it felt as though it might burst from my chest. I turned my gaze upward, trying to locate the source of that jarring noise. In that split second, as my eyes darted across the deepening sky, I saw it. A glimmering silver object moving with a speed and grace that defied explanation. There, against the fading light, hovered the unmistakable shape of a pan saucer. an object that seemed to belong to some science fiction tale rather than the real world. It streaked past overhead in a blink, its motion so rapid it was as if it had been carved out of the very fabric of time. In the moment that followed, silence reigned once more, broken only by the soft rustling of the evening breeze and my own ragged breathing. I stood rooted to the spot, the image of that silvery disk etched permanently in my memory, as if it were both a sign and a warning from a realm far beyond my understanding. I couldn't process what I had just witnessed. My mind raced with questions. Was it a trick of the light? Could it have been a stray reflection from some mundane object? But deep inside, I felt certain that this was no ordinary occurrence. I recalled the way the sound of that screech still lingered in my ears, a sound that seemed too deliberate, too precise to be anything natural. Every nerve in my body was alight with both terror and a strange exhilaration, as if I had stumbled upon a secret that the universe had intended for no one else to know. When my mom's car finally appeared in the distance, the comfort of its headlights and the familiar rumble of its engine did little to dispel the shock that churned within me. I climbed into the car quietly. The image of the UFO burned into my eyes. I tried to speak, to describe what I had seen, but my words caught in my throat, replaced by an overwhelming sense of disbelief in my own experience. My mom listened with a gentle smile, attributing my story to an overactive imagination, a simple misinterpretation of a natural phenomenon. Yet even as she spoke, I could sense a reluctance in her eyes, a fleeting uncertainty that hinted she wasn't entirely convinced by her own explanation. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself returning to that back parking lot in my thoughts. Every time the sky deepened into twilight or a sudden noise shattered the quiet, I was reminded of that moment. I began to notice small things, a glint in a cloud, a flash of movement above the treetops, that made my heart race and my skin crawl. I would sit for long periods, eyes fixed on the heavens, hoping for another glimpse of that extraordinary craft. But each time, there was only the mundane rhythm of nature and the empty silence of an unassuming sky. I shared the incident with anyone who would listen, friends at school, teachers, even family members at gatherings. Every retelling of my story was met with polite smiles and dismissive laughter. It must have been a plane or a weather balloon, they'd say, shaking their heads as if to signal that I had missed some obvious explanation. Despite the laughter and skepticism, I knew what I had seen was real. The sheer impossibility of the object's speed and the eerie precision of its movement left no room for a simple, rational explanation. Yet no amount of persistence could convince anyone else that my memory was untainted by mere childhood fantasies. In the years that followed, the encounter took on a life of its own in my mind. The image of that silvery disk became a touchstone, reminder that there are mysteries in the world that defy our attempts to neatly explain them. At night, when the world grows quiet and shadows stretch long across my room, I sometimes hear a faint echo that resembles that high-pitched screech, a sound that sends shivers down my spine. It makes me wonder if the universe is trying, in its own cryptic way, to communicate with me, or perhaps to remind me that I once bore witness to something extraordinary. I began to study the accounts of others who claimed to have seen unexplained phenomena, seeking solace in the idea that I was not alone in my experiences. Yet every new story I read seemed to only deepen the mystery. There were no definitive answers, only fragments of encounters and half-remembered sensations that left me both yearning for clarity and dreading the possibility of further revelations. In quiet moments, I even questioned my own sanity, wondering if perhaps my young mind had misinterpreted a fleeting trick of light as something far more sinister. The burden of this secret grew heavier with time. While others moved on, dismissing the encounter as a relic of childhood, I carried it with me, a constant nagging presence that colored my perception of the world. Every time I looked up at the sky, I was haunted by the possibility that the object might return, that the silence of the heavens might once again be broken by that terrifying, high-pitched screech. And every time I shared my story, the dismissive laughter of others only deepened the isolation I felt, as if I were the sole keeper of a truth too immense for ordinary minds to accept. I still remember the texture of that moment, the chill of the evening air mingling with the residual tremor of fear, the overwhelming silence that followed the UFO's swift departure, and the unsettling realization that the world is far more mysterious than we are ever told. It is a memory that has shaped me in ways I am only beginning to understand, a memory that whispers to me in the quiet hours of the night and reminds me that not everything can be explained away with logic and reason. Even now, decades later, I continue to look up at the sky with a sense of wary expectation. Every shimmer of light, every unexplained sound carries with it the possibility of that day in 6th grade, a day when the fabric of normalcy was torn apart by an encounter that defied explanation. And though I know that most dismiss my story as a figment of an overactive childhood imagination, I also know that some secrets are meant to remain unsolved, lingering in the shadows of our memories like a silent, persistent echo. I carry that experience with me, a quiet reminder that the universe holds mysteries far beyond our understanding, and that sometimes the truth is far stranger and more terrifying than the wildest of our dreams. Redito 3. I've never told anyone this before, but one sweltering summer afternoon, while sharing a quiet lunch on the deck with my mom, something inexplicable changed everything. I remember the air was heavy and still, the sun beating down with a relentless intensity that made the wooden boards beneath our feet warm to the touch. I was savoring a simple meal, a ham sandwich and a cold glass of lemonade, when my mom's gaze shifted upward, and so did mine. There, in the clear, cloudless sky, a small white orb appeared, hovering silently at a distance of 2 or 3 miles. At first, I thought it was a stray balloon or a trick of the light, but as I squinted, the orb revealed its peculiar nature. It moved with a deliberate, almost mechanical precision, gliding back and forth as if scanning the horizon for something unknown. Its brightness was unyielding against the blue, and every time it shifted direction, it sent a chill down my spine. For 15 long minutes, we sat transfixed, our conversation reduced to a series of whispered questions and uneasy glances. At first, the phenomenon seemed almost benign, a curious oddity that might have been the result of a secret local festival or an art installation. My mom, ever the rational one, mused quietly, maybe it's a weather balloon or some kind of drone. Yet, deep down, I could sense that this was no ordinary device. I felt my heart quicken, each beat echoing in the silence that had swallowed our usual afternoon banter. My mouth went dry, and I could almost taste the coppery tang of fear, even as I tried to convince myself it was all a trick of my mind. The orb's motion was both mesmerizing and unnerving. It darted swiftly, pausing now and then as if gathering data on our quiet little world below. I remember the way the sunlight refracted off its surface, scattering tiny specks of light around it, as if it were a tiny satellite dissecting the very air we breathed. I kept wondering if it had seen us, if we were merely a part of its scanning routine. My mom's eyes met mine, sharing a silent question of what on earth we had stumbled upon. For a long stretch of time, the world seemed to hold its breath with us. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the orb vanished. One moment it was there in the vast expanse, methodically cruising across the sky. The next, it evaporated into nothingness, leaving behind only the fading hume of our racing thoughts. The abrupt disappearance felt more disturbing than its steady, eerie presence. I sat there for several minutes, trying to process what I had witnessed. The deck, the familiar chirp of crickets beginning to emerge, and even the rustling leaves suddenly seemed alien. The normalcy of that summer day had been irreparably shattered. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, replaying the moment over and over. That night, as darkness settled and I lay in bed, the memory of the orb transformed into something more menacing. I remembered the way it moved, the precision of its scan, and the lingering question, what had it been looking for? Sleep eluded me. I could hear my pulse thumping in my ears and the soft creaks of the house becoming sinister whispers in the silence. Every small sound was magnified, a floorboard creaking, a window tapping in the wind, each one a reminder that the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary had been blurred. The next morning, I hesitantly mentioned the orb to a friend over coffee. His casual dismissal, "You're overthinking it, it was probably just some weird light phenomenon," did nothing to ease my discomfort. Instead, it deepened my sense of isolation. I started scouring online forums and local news archives, uncovering stories of similar encounters that stretched back decades. These accounts were cryptic, filled with half-remembered details and vague warnings. Many people claimed to have seen a luminous object hovering silently, scanning the area, only to vanish without a trace. Some even reported subsequent episodes of strange occurrences, lost time, inexplicable cold spots, and a pervasive feeling of being watched. In the following weeks, I found myself increasingly distracted by the thought of that orb. It wasn't long before its presence seeped into my everyday life. While walking to the local grocery store or simply sitting by the window, I would catch fleeting glimpses of white light on the periphery of my vision. At first, I rationalized these moments as tricks of the light or my overactive imagination. But with every incident, the sense of unease grew stronger, and I began to feel as though I were being observed by something beyond comprehension. One particularly humid evening, I stepped outside to retrieve the mail. The night was unusually still, and as I moved toward the porch, I noticed a faint glimmer in the sky. I paused, my body frozen in place, and stared upward. There, again, was that peculiar light. A diminutive, almost imperceptible orb drifting lazily in the darkness. My heart pounded fiercely in my chest, and my throat constricted with a mix of dread and disbelief. The orb lingered for a few agonizing moments before slipping behind a copse of trees, leaving me with a deep, unshakable feeling of foreboding. I began to question everything I once thought I understood about the world. Was this orb a benign anomaly, a natural yet unexplainable phenomenon? Or was it an omen of something far more sinister lurking in the shadows? My mind oscillated between rational explanations and irrational terror. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more I was drawn into its mystery, and soon I found myself searching for signs, obsessing over every unusual detail in the sky. My relationship with my mom also changed subtly after that day. We no longer shared casual conversations over lunch on the deck as we once had. Instead, an unspoken worry hung between us, a fragile understanding that we had both witnessed something that defied explanation. She would sometimes catch me staring out the window, lost in thought, as if waiting for the orb to reappear. I couldn't shake the conviction that our lives had been marked by that fleeting encounter, leaving behind an indelible shadow. As the years passed, the memory of that summer day remained vivid, an ever-present specter in my mind. Every clear night brought with it the haunting possibility that I might see that enigmatic orb again. And sometimes, when the night was exceptionally quiet, I could almost sense a silent observer, as if the orb had imprinted its ghostly presence onto my very soul. Even now, as I write this, I can still feel the chill that ran down my spine on that unforgettable day. I have learned to live with the uncertainty, the unanswered questions that continue to haunt me. The orb became a symbol of all that is unexplainable in our world, a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life, there lies a realm of mysteries that defy logic and reason. I've come to accept that some encounters leave an indelible mark, a subtle thread of unease woven into the fabric of our lives, forever reminding us that the familiar can turn foreign in an instant. And so, whenever I step out onto my deck or catch a glimpse of a peculiar light in the sky, I am transported back to that summer day, to the moment when the boundaries between reality and the unknown began to blur. Redditor 4. I've never told anyone this before, but there are moments in life when the mundane shatters into something unrecognizable. I've known Marcus for years. Quiet, unassuming, the type who only speaks when his words matter. Most people fall prey to what I call the 10 pounds of bull syndrome, bragging about exaggerations and tall tales, but not Marcus. He's the kind of guy who, when I pick up a quarter off the parking lot, can tell me exactly what kind of plane, chopper, or cloud is drifting above us. His eyes always seem to search the skies, as if seeking answers that lie hidden in plain sight. It was on one of those humid evenings when the air felt thick with secrets that Marcus finally shared the story that has haunted me ever since. We sat on the peeling bench behind my apartment building, the neon glow of a distant sign barely lighting our faces as he leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not one to embellish," he began, his tone measured and deliberate. "But when I was 12, something happened that I can't explain even now." His gaze drifted upward, as though he could still see the memory hovering there in the twilight. Marcus recalled that summer with startling clarity. He had been waiting for the bus near the edge of our small town. the kind of place where everyone's routine is etched into memory and the sky feels endless. The day was deceptively ordinary, with no hint that the world was about to twist into something otherworldly. Then, amidst the familiar clatter of everyday life, he saw it. A massive, complex flying station hovering silently above the town. It wasn't like any airplane or helicopter he'd ever seen. Instead, it was a structure of multiple levels, each one layered upon the other with an architecture that defied logic. Smaller orbs whirled around it, their shapes shifting almost imperceptibly. First 2, then 4, then 3, a mesmerizing dance that left him both awed and terrified. Marcus's voice trembled as he described how the station lingered in the sky for what felt like an eternity, at least 30 minutes while he waited for the bus. The image of it is seared into my mind, a colossal craft, silent yet commanding, with orbs that seemed to pulse in rhythm with an alien heartbeat. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that during that long wait, another strange craft appeared. This one, he said, had descended slowly and docked with the larger station while it rotated languidly about 500 feet above the ground. The whole spectacle was surreal, as if he had stumbled upon a secret not meant for human eyes. I listened intently, the weight of his words pressing upon me. Marcus had always been a bastion of truth in a world full of exaggeration. If anyone could be trusted with such a story, it was him. He wasn't the type to spin fanciful tales just to impress. He observed the world with an almost preternatural accuracy, dissecting every cloud and nuance with a meticulous eye. "I know what's real," he had said, "and I know what's not." That day, everything I saw was undeniable. His certainty left me with an unsettling blend of awe and dread, a feeling that the boundaries of our reality were far more porous than I had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Marcus's revelation refused to fade from my thoughts. I found myself glancing upward whenever I had a spare moment, half expecting to catch another glimpse of that impossible sight. The sky, once a comforting expanse of blue and white, now felt like a vast canvas for the unknown. Even the most routine errands became tinged with paranoia, as if every shadow or glimmer might herald the return of those spectral visitors. One night, as a storm brewed on the horizon, I sat alone on my back porch, the wind whispering secrets through the trees. I recalled Marcus's unwavering tone as he recounted his childhood encounter, and I wondered if perhaps our eyes had been trained to see only what we expected. The darkened sky suddenly seemed to pulse with an eerie light, and for a fleeting moment, I could almost swear I saw a glint of metallic structure drifting among the clouds. My heart hammered in my chest, a visceral reminder that I was not alone, that something out there was watching, an observer from beyond the known. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that day with Marcus began to permeate every aspect of my life. I started noticing subtle anomalies, a glimmer at the corner of my vision, an inexplicable hum in the silence of night, and even the occasional, fleeting outline of a shape that vanished before I could focus. The mundane became menacing. I would find myself pausing in the middle of a conversation, my mind racing back to that childhood image. A vast, otherworldly station with shifting orbs, hovering with an authority that belied its silent, inscrutable intent. Marcus never offered any further details, but his story had planted a seed of unease that grew with every clear night. I began to dread the tranquility of the skies, now aware that what lurked above might not be bound by human conventions. His recollections made me question every rational explanation I'd clung to all my life. I remembered him mentioning once, offhandedly, UFO doesn't necessarily mean space guys. It was a statement that chilled me, suggesting that the forces at work were beyond even our wildest speculations. The mysterious station, with its docking craft and morphing orbs, defied classification. And if, as he implied, technology like the Blackbird, an aircraft nearly 50 years old, could exist and still inspire awe, then what of these entities that seemed to traverse time and space effortlessly? Late one humid night, as I wandered the empty streets in a restless haze, the hum of a distant engine caught my attention. The sound was low, almost imperceptible, yet it vibrated through the soles of my shoes and the marrow of my bones. I looked upward, half expecting to see nothing more than the reflection of streetlights on rain-slicked pavement. Instead, there, suspended high above, was an unmistakable glimmer, a cluster of lights that pulsed with a rhythm that mirrored my own erratic heartbeat. It wasn't the sweeping arc of a passing aircraft, nor the predictable path of a satellite. It was something altogether different. An echo of Marcus's long-ago revelation, a silent testament to a mystery that refused to be confined by the boundaries of reason. In that moment, I felt a profound disquiet settle over me, as if the night itself had conspired to reveal secrets too vast for human comprehension. The lights twinkled and shifted, and for one agonizing second, I thought I saw a structure forming, a shape reminiscent of the multi-leveled station Marcus had described. Panic and wonder collided in a maelstrom of emotion, and I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the unfolding spectacle. Had Marcus's story been a mere figment of a child's imagination, or was it a window into a reality that lurked just beyond our reach? I have no answers, only the lingering terror that something out there exists, watching and waiting. Marcus's words, his quiet, unwavering truth, continue to echo in my mind. Every clear night, every unsuspecting moment under a vast, starlit sky, brings with it the possibility that the alien craft might return. I find solace in the certainty that Marcus was right, that what he witnessed was real, and yet, the terror of the unknown remains, a constant reminder that our world is not as simple or as safe as it once seemed. Redditor 5. I've never told anyone this before, but I still remember that day with an unsettling clarity that haunts me even now. I was just a kid, barely understanding the vastness of the world when I found myself in the back seat of my dad's old car. The summer heat was oppressive, the air heavy with the smell of warm asphalts and old leather. My dad was driving with his friend in the front, both of them lost in conversation or silent thought, while I sat quietly, absorbing every detail of the ride. The windows were rolled down and the wind whipped through my hair, carrying with it the distant sounds of a town that felt both familiar and strangely distant. It happened on a day that began like any other. I remember gazing out the window, watching the world blur past, when something caught my eye. There, riding quietly behind our car, was an object that defied explanation. It was a perfect circle, suspended in the sky, with a light shining from its center. The glow was steady yet mesmerizing, pulsing gently as if it were alive. I rubbed my eyes, convinced that it was just a trick of the light or a stray reflection from the sun, but when I looked again, it was still there, trailing us silently. My heart pounded as I turned to my dad, desperate for him to see what I was seeing. "Dad, look!" I pleaded, tapping his arm and pointing frantically toward the window. But he kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his face impassive and unresponsive. His friend glanced briefly in my direction, but his expression remained unreadable, as if he had already dismissed my excitement as the fanciful musings of a child. I felt a surge of isolation, as if I were the only one aware of this inexplicable presence trailing us. For what felt like an eternity, the circular object maintained its silent vigil, hovering just behind our car. Its light shone with an otherworldly intensity that contrasted sharply with the natural brightness of the day. Every time I stole a glance, the orb seemed to shimmer a little more, its edges soft and undefined, as if it were not quite solid. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than a misinterpreted shadow or a stray reflection bouncing off a distant surface. Yet deep inside, an inexplicable terror took root, a fear that there was something truly alien and deliberate about its presence. As we drove on, the object appeared to adjust its position, staying perfectly aligned with us as if it were following some hidden command. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, studying our every move. The steady hum of the car's engine, the rustling of leaves along the roadside, and even the gentle clatter of tires on the pavement, all faded into a background murmur, overwhelmed by the profound intensity of that silent observer. In that moment, the world around me shrank to the confines of the car and the vast, unexplainable expanse beyond the window. I remember how my mind raced with a tumult of questions. Was this really a UFO? Could it be an experimental aircraft, or perhaps just an atmospheric anomaly playing tricks on my young eyes? Every rational explanation seemed to crumble under the weight of the sheer strangeness of the experience. To me, it was undeniably a UFO, a mysterious, circle-like presence with a light that beckoned from another realm. Even though I was just a kid, and even if I had secretly hoped for the magic of a fantastical encounter, I couldn't ignore the cold, hard feeling in my gut that told me this was real. The remainder of the car ride passed in a heavy silence, punctuated only by the occasional shifting of the object as it maintained its silent pursuit. I stole glances at my dad, hoping for a spark of recognition in his eyes, but he remained oblivious, absorbed in the mundane act of driving. His friend, too, seemed lost in thought, as if the world beyond the windshield held no more wonder than the routine they had come to expect. And so, the mysterious orb continued its slow, unwavering dance in the sky, a silent guardian, or perhaps a silent predator, looming just out of reach. Eventually, our journey came to an end, and the car pulled into the driveway of our modest home. I remember stepping out, my feet hesitant on the warm concrete, my eyes still fixed on the empty expanse of the sky. The orb had vanished as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving behind a void that seemed to mock my desperate search for answers. The sudden absence of that luminous presence felt like a cruel twist of fate, a fleeting glimpse into a world that was forever hidden from ordinary eyes. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of that encounter. I would find myself gazing upward on clear afternoons and starry nights, half expecting to see that eerie circle of light reappear. Every unexpected glimmer, every unusual reflection caught my eye, triggered a cascade of thoughts that blurred the line between reality and imagination. I questioned whether the light was simply a stray reflection or if it was indeed the same mysterious object that had followed us that day. Over time, as I grew older, I began to rationalize the experience. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a product of an overactive imagination fueled by childhood fantasies of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. But deep down, a stubborn part of me clung to the memory, refusing to let it be dismissed by logic alone. To me, it was a UFO, a tangible encounter with the unknown that defied explanation. Until I am proven wrong, I will carry that memory as both a cherished mystery and a haunting reminder that sometimes the universe has secrets far beyond our understanding. Now, whenever I catch a glimpse of an unusual light in the night sky, I feel a flicker of that old fear mixed with wonder. I wonder if that silent observer might be out there, still watching, still waiting. And even though I've grown up and learned to question everything, there remains a part of me that will always believe in the possibility of the inexplicable. A belief born on that long ago day in a car when my dad's attention was elsewhere and I saw what I knew to be a UFO. Redditor 6. I've never told anyone this before, but I still replay that night in my mind like a scratched record that won't let go. It was back in May of this year, a time when my college town was abuzz with excitement and anticipation over a planned blackout. The new electric company had decided to recalibrate the system, and from midnight until 5 a.m., the town would be plunged into darkness. For us, a band of college friends seeking both adventure and a temporary escape from the endless hum of lectures and deadlines, this blackout was an invitation to something unexpected. We gathered around a pool at a friend's place, a shimmering oasis of water and laughter amid the encroaching gloom. With the lights out, our usual distractions faded, leaving only the stars to guide our midnight revelry. We lounged on mismatched deck chairs and sprawled on the cool, damp grass, our eyes eventually drifting upward to the celestial canvas overhead. The sky was a pristine vault of glittering stars, punctuated by the slow, graceful drift of planets and the fleeting streaks of ordinary meteors. We were in awe of the vast, mysterious expanse, our voices hushed in reverence as we pointed out familiar constellations and whispered legends of gods and monsters. But then, something happened that would shatter the calm and etch itself into my memory. Amid the usual spectacle of the cosmos, an odd, pulsing glow caught my eye, a meteor unlike any I had ever seen. It was an unmistakable shade of orange, a vibrant hue that contrasted sharply with the cool blues and silvers of the surrounding stars. Intrigued and a little unnerved, I fixed my gaze on this strange traveler of the sky, expecting to witness the typical fiery tail as it burned through the atmosphere. Instead, I saw nothing of the sort. The orange light cut through the darkness like a perfect disk, lacking any semblance of the ephemeral trail that usually marks a meteor's passage. As I watched, time seemed to slow. The object maintained its steady, deliberate pace, moving across the heavens with an almost mechanical precision. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, a mix of excitement and dread pooling in my stomach. I couldn't help but wonder if this was truly just a meteor or if it was something more, a sign that defied the natural order. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding in my ears, trying to catch every subtle nuance of its motion. The rest of the group had fallen into a similar stunned silence, their eyes wide and unblinking as they too followed this strange phenomenon. Then, in a moment that defied every law of physics I thought I understood, the orange object halted mid-flight. I could barely breathe as the world around me seemed to pause, the usual chorus of nighttime sounds reduced to a haunting, oppressive stillness. It was as if the universe itself had taken a deep, collective breath, and in that suspended moment, I felt both incredibly small and exposed. My mind raced, questioning every possible explanation, a glitch in my vision, a trick of the light, or even some sort of optical illusion. Yet, nothing in my young adult experience had prepared me for what came next. Without any warning, the object reversed its course in one fluid, almost deliberate motion. It turned sharply, heading in the exact opposite direction from which it had arrived, as if retracing its steps with an unnerving sense of purpose. I stared in disbelief, unable to tear my eyes away from the sky. The orange glow, once a simple point of light, now moved with a haunting intentionality that sent waves of fear through me. I heard a gasp from one of my friends, followed by a low murmur of agreement as 4 others confirmed that they had witnessed the same impossible reversal. In that shared moment of silent terror, the beauty of the night sky transformed into something far more sinister. The familiar constellations and drifting planets no longer offered comfort. Instead, they became the backdrop for a mystery that refused to be explained by ordinary science. The object's sudden change in direction was not the erratic path of a common meteor, but a calculated, almost deliberate maneuver. It felt as if we had been granted a glimpse into a realm beyond our understanding, a realm where the laws of nature could be rewritten in an instant. For the rest of the night, my thoughts were a tangled web of confusion and dread. I lay awake long after the pool party had dissolved into scattered laughter and whispered speculations, my mind unable to settle on any rational explanation. The image of that vibrant orange disk, suspended in time, then reversing its trajectory, haunted every subsequent moment. I questioned whether it had been an experimental craft, a malfunctioning satellite, or something far more inexplicable, something that defied every known law of physics. I began to research, poring over forums and articles late into the night, seeking clues in the cryptic reports of others who claimed to have witnessed similar phenomena. Every account added layers of uncertainty, each detail as elusive and shifting as the object itself. Some dismissed it as a rare meteorological occurrence, while others suggested it was a sign of an intelligence far beyond our comprehension. None of the explanations resonated with the raw, visceral memory of that May night. I remained convinced that what I had seen was something extraordinary, something that challenged the very fabric of our reality. In the weeks that followed, I found myself frequently gazing upward whenever the night sky unveiled its tapestry of stars. Every flash of light, every unusual movement, became a potential harbinger of that mysterious orange glow. The universe, once a realm of endless wonder, now seemed fraught with hidden eyes and secret messages. The beauty of the cosmos was forever tainted by the memory of that reversal, a moment when the predictable order of the stars was disrupted by an anomaly that spoke of unknown forces at work. I still don't have an answer, and perhaps I never will. The orange object remains an enigma, a mystery that lives on in the corners of my mind, challenging my understanding of what is possible. To this day, when I look up at the night sky, I am reminded of that singular, unsettling event, a reminder that the universe is vast and full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. And so, with every starlit night, I continue to search for answers, holding on to the possibility that one day I might understand the true nature of that inexplicable phenomenon, or at the very least, learn to live with the haunting uncertainty that it has left behind. Redditor 7. I've never told anyone this before, but I still remember that cloudy night as if it were yesterday. The sky was a dense, swirling mass of charcoal and slate, a perfect backdrop for secrets that the night might hold. I was driving my friend Ryan home to his apartment a mile away, or so I thought, when something impossible revealed itself above us. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic whoosh of the windshield wipers formed the only soundtrack to that surreal journey until the unexpected happened. I was navigating the familiar streets of our college town, its neon signs flickering intermittently in the gloom, when I first noticed the lights. At first, they appeared as mere reflections of the city's stray luminescence, but as I glanced upward, I saw at least 7 pulsating red lights scattered across the cloudy expanse. Unlike the strobing red beacons of a passing aircraft, these lights pulsed slowly, almost hypnotically, as if they were alive with their own deliberate rhythm. They were clustered tightly together at one moment, then inexplicably spread apart, as if orchestrated by some unseen hand. My heart began to race, a mix of excitement and apprehension flooding my senses. I could feel my palms grow slick on the steering wheel as I forced my eyes to remain fixed on those mysterious orbs. The usual chatter and light banter of our late-night drives evaporated, replaced by a heavy silence punctuated only by the relentless pulse of those lights. Something about their steady, almost beckoning motion was unnerving, yet I found myself inexplicably drawn to them. As we neared Ryan's apartment, a strange impulse took over me, a reckless desire to experience the unexplainable up close. I recall thinking, with a laugh that betrayed both nervousness and daring, that I'd always wanted to make contact with beings from beyond, even if it meant getting abducted. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, I floored the accelerator as soon as we passed his building. The car surged forward on the empty stretch of road, and without a second thought, I pulled over in a desolate area near a cluster of trees. I turned off the engine, the abrupt silence intensifying the moment. Ryan, equally baffled by the sudden change in plans, exchanged a questioning look with me. Without waiting for him to protest, I bolted from the car, my feet pounding on the wet pavement as I sprinted toward the source of the pulsing lights. The night air was cool against my flushed skin, each step punctuated by the echo of my heart's frantic beat. From where I stood, beneath the murky veil of clouds, the red lights were even more mesmerizing. They hovered low in the sky, their pulsations growing in intensity as I approached. It was as if they were responding to my presence, drawing closer with every cautious step I took. I could feel the static charge in the air, an electric anticipation that both thrilled and terrified me. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts as I reached out, half expecting one of them to descend and envelop me in a warm, otherworldly glow. Ryan caught up with me moments later, his face a mix of disbelief and concern. "Man, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly as he looked skyward. I could only grin, the absurdity of my own daring not quite masking the undercurrent of fear. "I've always wanted this, to be taken," I replied with a shaky laugh, half in jest and half in genuine longing for something beyond the mundane. We stood there, side by side, as the lights began a slow, deliberate ascent. One by one, they lifted upward, leaving behind thin trails of red luminescence that dissipated into the roiling clouds above. There was no sound, no hum or whir that might have indicated machinery at work. The silence was absolute, as if the universe had hushed itself in reverence for whatever was unfolding. The pulsating lights moved in a choreographed pattern, almost as if they were following each other in a celestial dance. The closer they got, the more my mind swirled with possibilities. Were they some sort of signal? A greeting from a species beyond our understanding? Or perhaps a warning? My inner skeptic warred with a sense of wonder that bordered on the ecstatic. Every instinct in my body screamed to run back to the safety of the car. Yet the allure of the unknown held me captive, forcing me to confront the impossible right there under the thick, clouded sky. At that moment, time itself seemed to slow. Each pulse of the red lights stretched into eternity, each beat of my heart echoing in the vast silence of the night. I watched, transfixed, as the lights continued their ascent, now positioned directly above us, their glow reflecting off the slick pavement and lending an eerie glow to the surrounding trees. Ryan and I exchanged a look, wordless communication passing between us. A shared realization that we were witnessing something extraordinary, something that defied explanation. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the lights began to vanish. One by one, they dissolved into the dense clouds, retreating upward until they were nothing more than fleeting specks in a sky that had returned to its familiar, oppressive gray. In the blink of an eye, the mysterious display was over, leaving us standing there in the damp darkness, our minds reeling from the encounter. We remained there for several minutes, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant hum of traffic far away. I felt a profound emptiness, a lingering sense of loss, as if a door to another realm had been abruptly closed. My heart still pounded in my ears, each beat a reminder of that surreal moment when the ordinary world had given way to something utterly unexplainable. Ryan finally broke the silence, his voice low and tentative. Did you really think they'd abduct you?" he asked, half amused and half afraid of the answer. I managed a wry smile, though the humor was tinged with a trace of regret. "Yeah, I did," I admitted softly. "I always wanted to believe there was something more out there, something to take us away from all this, but I never expected to see it with my own eyes." My words hung in the air, a confession of both youthful yearning and the stark reality of the inexplicable. As we turned to head back to the car, the weight of the encounter settled in, leaving us both profoundly changed. The night had revealed a sliver of a truth that was as terrifying as it was mesmerizing, a truth that blurred the line between science and the supernatural, between what we know and what we dare not comprehend. The pulsating red lights were gone, but the memory of their deliberate dance, their silent promise of contact from beyond, lingered in my mind. That night, as I lay in bed in the hours before dawn, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see those lights, their slow, rhythmic pulses marking the passage of a moment that defied logic. I wondered if they were a fleeting trick of the atmosphere, or perhaps a calculated message from entities whose intentions we could never fathom. And even now, whenever a cloudy night descends, I find myself glancing upward, half hoping for that otherworldly glow to reappear. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will, but that night left an indelible mark on me, a haunting reminder that sometimes the cosmos has secrets too vast and mysterious for our minds to grasp fully. In the endless expanse of a cloudy sky, where darkness meets the light of distant stars, there might just be more than we can ever imagine, waiting silently to be discovered. Redditor 8. I've never told anyone this before, but there was a morning not too long ago that changed the way I see the sky, and perhaps everything else. It was a chilly spring morning in England, around 6 a.m., when I was walking to work along a quiet street. The sky was a wash of pale blue and soft gray, the sun yet to fully assert its presence, leaving the world in a sort of in-between state. In that liminal light, every detail seemed sharper, every shadow more mysterious. I had always enjoyed these early walks, relishing the solitude and the fresh promise of a new day. But that morning, something in the heavens caught my eye in a way I hadn't ever experienced before. I was nearly a mile from my workplace, on a route that offered an unobstructed view of the sky. Low-rise buildings, minimal foliage, and a wide-open expanse overhead. My routine was simple. I'd lace up my shoes, pull on my coat, and let my thoughts wander as I strolled along the pavement. On that particular morning, however, my mind was abruptly seized by the sight of a bright, triangular object slicing through the early dawn. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, and I found myself both transfixed and disoriented by its appearance. At first glance, the object was brilliant, almost blinding in its intensity for a mere couple of seconds. It reminded me of the International Space Station as it passes overhead, that fleeting moment when it shines with a light that seems both otherworldly and reassuring. Initially, I assumed it must be a satellite, as I had seen many gliding across the sky during my previous walks. But as I continued watching, it became clear that this was no ordinary satellite. It moved at a speed that defied all normal expectations. In the brief span of 2, maybe 3 seconds, it shot across the sky from east to west, leaving behind a trail of brilliance that quickly faded into the soft glow of pre-dawn light. My heart pounded as I slowed my pace, my eyes fixed on the object. The early morning chill seemed to vanish, replaced by a heat of adrenaline that rushed through my veins. I strained to comprehend what I was witnessing. A triangular shape, its edges defined against the slowly lightening sky, moving with an intensity that made the world around me blur into insignificance. I remember thinking, with a mix of excitement and disbelief, that this had to be something far beyond any conventional explanation. Just as I began to settle into the shock of its rapid transit, something even more baffling happened. I could still see the object shining in the distance, a beacon against the emerging day. And then, as it neared the horizon, it executed a maneuver that left me utterly speechless. Without any warning, as if following a hidden set of instructions, it turned a perfect 90 degrees and shot off to the north. The change was instantaneous. A crisp, definitive right-angle turn that no known vehicle or aircraft could possibly make, at least not in the manner I had just witnessed. For a split second, time seemed to slow down even further. I stood frozen on the pavement, my eyes locked on that dazzling point of light as it accelerated northward faster than ever before. It was as if the object had been following a path all its own, one that ignored the natural curves and gentle turns of our earthly landscape. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared from view, leaving me with nothing but questions and a deep, gnawing sense of wonder mixed with dread. I continued my walk to work, but my mind was no longer on the mundane details of my daily routine. Instead, I replayed the spectacle over and over, trying to make sense of the impossible. Had I really seen a triangular object moving at such an unfathomable speed? The memory was so vivid that it felt as though it had been etched into my very soul, a secret message from the cosmos that I wasn't sure I was meant to decipher. Over the following days, I found myself scrutinizing the sky at every available moment. I looked for patterns in the flight of birds, for stray flashes of light that might hint at the extraordinary occurrence, but nothing ever quite matched the precision and speed of that morning's event. I turned to online forums and obscure websites, seeking accounts from others who might have experienced similar anomalies. Some posts were filled with speculation about experimental aircraft or high-altitude drones, but none of these explanations satisfied me. The way the object moved, its sudden, flawless right-angle turn, was unlike any technology I had ever encountered or read about. I began to wonder if perhaps what I had seen was a glimpse into a realm where the conventional rules of physics were bent or even broken. The idea both terrified and fascinated me in equal measure. Could it be that there were entities or technologies in existence that defied our basic understanding of motion and space? My mind, always eager for rational explanations, balked at the possibility, yet the evidence was right there in the memory of that crisp spring morning. In the weeks that followed, every clear day seemed to hold a potential for the extraordinary. I would pause on my walks, looking up at the sky with a renewed sense of vigilance. The ordinary became a canvas for possibility, a place where a fleeting glimpse of something unexplainable could shatter the monotony of everyday life. Friends and acquaintances began to notice my preoccupation with the skies. They asked if I was obsessing over UFO sightings, or if I had started following conspiracy theories. I only smiled and brushed off their concerns, unwilling to share the raw intensity of the experience that had so thoroughly unsettled me. Even now, when the early morning light begins to creep over the horizon, I can't help but scan the heavens, half expecting to see that triangular shape reappear, defying gravity and logic once more. The memory remains as clear as the day it happened. A brilliant, almost impossible moment when the familiar world was momentarily overtaken by a presence that seemed to whisper of secrets beyond our reach. I still wonder what it was: an experimental craft, a natural phenomenon misinterpreted by my overactive imagination, or perhaps something else entirely, a message from a reality that exists just beyond the veil of our understanding. I wouldn't call it an encounter as such, but that day, something extraordinary unfolded before my eyes, a fleeting intersection of our world with something utterly alien. And even though I have no definitive answers, I have come to accept that the universe is vast and filled with mysteries that are meant to be witnessed, if only for a few seconds, before disappearing into the fabric of the unknown. Redditor 9. I've never told anyone this before, but there's a night from my youth that still haunts me. A night when fear and wonder blurred into one indistinguishable moment. I was 16, tearing down a gravel road in the middle of the upper Midwest, the chill of the night creeping under my skin. I was already late for curfew, and every minute that passed felt like an eternity, weighed down by both excitement and the dread of getting caught. My old truck rattled along at 60 miles per hour, gravel spraying beneath the tires, the only sound the rhythmic hum of the engine and the whisper of wind against cold metal. The road stretched before me, a narrow ribbon cutting through open fields and sparse clusters of trees. The moon had long since hidden behind thick, low-hanging clouds, leaving only my headlights to carve out a path in the darkness. In that dim beam, every detail of the rugged road was accentuated: the jagged edges of loose stones, the silhouettes of distant farm outbuildings, and then something that I couldn't have anticipated. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of 4 glowing orbs arranged in a perfect line, hovering off to the right side of the road. They weren't the scattered stars I sometimes imagined on nights like these. They were unnervingly close and emitted a pulsating red light. In that instant, the steady pace of 60 miles per hour was replaced by an overwhelming need to stop. I slammed my brakes, and the truck skidded to a sudden halt. Time seemed to slow as my heart pounded louder than the engine's dying roar. For a few suspended seconds, the world around me fell into a heavy silence. My entire body went numb, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I sat frozen, the shock making my limbs unresponsive, while an irrational, almost desperate desire to be taken away by those mysterious lights flashed through my mind. A childish, wild hope of contact with something beyond this mundane world. It was a ridiculous thought, yet in that moment, with fear clouding my judgment, it seemed like a plausible escape from the terror I felt. I kept my foot firmly on the brake as I stared at the orbs. Their red glow pulsed in a slow, deliberate rhythm, casting eerie shadows over the gravel. Each pulse sent a shiver racing through me, as if the orbs were speaking a silent code I couldn't decipher. My mind raced with possibilities. Had I stumbled upon something extraterrestrial, a secret craft from another world? Or was it merely an optical illusion conjured by my overactive imagination under the influence of adrenaline and fear? I dared not move. Every instinct urged me to run, to hide, to do something, anything, to escape the mounting dread. But curiosity, dark and irresistible, kept me locked in place. I strained my eyes, trying to discern any detail in the dim light that might explain the impossible sight. The orbs were set in a straight line, and as I peered more closely, I began to notice a subtle structure behind them. My breath hitched as I tried to piece together the vague shapes against the backdrop of the night. After what felt like an eternity, the image sharpened. I realized that the 4 pulsating orbs were not hovering independently in the void. They were the reflectors on the back of a tractor. A tractor, moving slowly along the roadside, had a large disc attached to its rear, and on that disc were 4 reflectors arranged perfectly in line. My headlights had caught them just right, and in the haze of adrenaline and darkness, they had transformed into something unworldly. The shock of this revelation washed over me in a rush of relief mixed with lingering embarrassment. I exhaled shakily, my heart still drumming in my chest, as I processed that the terror of the moment had been nothing more than a trick of light and perspective. The tractor, its engine a low, constant murmur, was methodically making its way down the road, oblivious to the panic it had inadvertently caused in a teenager desperate to be abducted by aliens. I sat there for several long moments, my senses gradually returning to normal. The immediate terror dissolved into a bittersweet cocktail of amusement and chagrin. In that moment, I had experienced a brush with what I thought was the supernatural, a fleeting, ghostly encounter that sent my mind spiraling into wild, fantastical possibilities. Instead, I was left with the mundane reality of a tractor, its reflectors perfectly aligned to play tricks on a scared and impulsive 16-year-old. Even as I resumed my journey, the incident clung to me like a shadow. Every time I drove down that same gravel road in later years, I couldn't help but glance to the side, half expecting to see those 4 eerie orbs reappear. The memory became a quiet reminder of how easily our minds can be duped by the interplay of light, speed, and our own hidden desires for something beyond the ordinary. Sometimes I still wonder about that night, not just about the near encounter with what I'd imagined to be an alien craft, but about the power of our perceptions, how in the darkness and isolation of a lonely road, the simplest objects, a tractor and its reflectors, can transform into a harbinger of something otherworldly. It's a lesson in both fear and imagination, a reminder that what we see in the dark is not always the truth, but often a distorted reflection of our own inner landscapes. I never did get in trouble for being late that night, and no one ever knew the half-minute terror that stopped my truck on that lonely stretch of road. Instead, it became a secret story tucked away in the recesses of my mind, a peculiar, almost humorous memory mingled with the raw edge of youthful fear. And even now, when the night is particularly dark and the roads stretch out empty before me, I find myself scanning the shadows, ever watchful for a glimmer that might once again transform the mundane into the inexplicable. That night, my heart learned the fragile boundary between reality and the phantoms we create. And in that suspended moment of terror and revelation, I discovered that sometimes the most ordinary things can become the stuff of legends in the flickering light of our imagination.